this new game sucks. Why couldn't they make this game like the old game? So if you played fighting games for even a little while, I'm sure you've run into old game good, new game bad discourse. As in, the new game has some problem, whether manufactured or real, and the previous game was pretty much perfect, and why did they make a new one, etc, etc. But I would say it's definitely wrong to say fighting games have not changed at all over the years. Even if you started a long time ago, way back in the year 2009. So I want to take some time today to look through things that I think are actually different, but not in the way I normally do. So I have a list of 4 things I think make fighting games feel generally different from when you were playing when you were younger. And the place I would definitely start would be with patches. Some of the beloved fighting game classics have been described as happy little accidents. I've heard that about games like Marvel vs. Capcom 2, CVS 2, and of course the first competitive 1v1 game I personally played, Super Smash Bros. Melee. So each of these games have something a little bit different. With Melee, so that's a game like I actually played compared to Marvel vs. Capcom 2 or CVS 2. There are so many things that seem to be accidents that people use to play the game. And the obvious, most famous one, no matter if you started recently or if you played way back in the day, would be wave dashing. This is a movement technique that involves air dashing into the ground, and it makes the game way faster because in combination with dashes, you can make your movement very ambiguous and quick. But since that's the obvious one to talk about, that's not what I'm going to talk about. I'm actually going to talk about something else, which would be the short hop. So one of my definite most favorite characters that I definitely think takes a lot of skill, and I'm not being sarcastic at all, is Falco. And one of the first things that you learn with Falco is how to do the short hop fast fall laser. When you do the laser on the ground, it has a lot of recovery. As in, he shoots the laser, he takes a pose, but he has to put the laser back and then you can move after. But for some reason, when you do it in the air, it has no recovery when you land. So if you could do this quickly, you can control large swaths of the stage very quickly, and it is a very difficult thing to deal with when you're just starting the game. I did call this a beginner technique, but my question for you is, did you find this on your own by any chance? This question is more for boomers, I guess, because it's not something I personally found. Are there any nerd emojis watching right now? And you might be like, that's an interesting choice to be like, short hop. The fact that short hop projectile doesn't have any landing recovery, so you can use it to keep advantage really easily, is an interesting example. But another game that has that is actually Marvel vs. Capcom 2. When you think about Cable, his signature super move is the Air Hyper Viper Beam. And just like Falco, for whatever reason, the air version does not share the same recovery as the ground version. Basically, there's none. So just like Falco can run around and go pew pew pew, Cable can also do Hyper Viper Beam like 3 or 4 times. And those two games both have a bunch of things that they just kind of work for some reason, and people took advantage of it to develop the game and push the limits of the game further. Now, CVS 2 has a glitch that changed the way the game was played forever. And it ended up being basically a feature of the game, I guess. You might be like, well, okay, wave dashing and things like that are like that for Melee 2, and you are right, but I don't think it's as extreme as CVS 2. So if you haven't played Capcom vs. SNK 2, the game has a groove system, so like a mode select. So after you pick your team, you also can pick a mode that changes system mechanics that the characters can do. So the thing we're talking about, and of course my boomers already know, is the roll cancel. So 3 grooves have rolls. The C groove, the A groove, and the K groove have invincible rolls. I didn't mention it, but since I said C, A, and K, right? So there's a CAP for Capcom, and there's the SNK for, SNK. So these rolls act like rolls in most modern fighting games. If you play games like Grand Blue Fantasy Versus, for example, has them. KOF has them. You do a roll. Maybe it's vulnerable for a couple of frames at the beginning. Maybe it's not. While they're moving, you're invincible. You can be thrown out of it, right? But in CVS 2, you can cancel the roll on the first 3 frames into any special move, which means you could basically make any special move invincible, which means like any character in the C, A, or K groove is Slayer from Guilty Gear, which I did not write in my script. It just popped in my head right now. That's really makes it feel crazier. If that doesn't like make you be like, wow, this sounds really broken? Can you imagine like M. Bison, for example, with an invincible Psycho Crusher, or Blanca doing an invincible electric chip damage move that's also plus? It's in CBS 2. That's the game that has that. And despite it sounding like crazy though, it did change the game a lot, and people learned both to use it and learn how to fight against it. I went in with CBS 2, but these 3 games that I just talked about, Marvel vs. Capcom 2, Capcom vs. SNK 2, and Super Smash Bros. Melee, all also share a unique problem from this perspective. I mean, a question, if you will. And that question is, what happens now? What do you do with the advent of a new game-changing technique? Do you let people try it? Does it seem too good? Do you ban it? Wave dashing at the beginning, right? I played this game in 2006. Wave dashing was just like, okay, we're moving fast. It's not something that like breaks the game, but something like roll cancel seems incredibly powerful. Any special move can be made invincible, and there's no one to really like complain to. The only thing you could hope for really is a brand new game that fixes the problems. So people had to play what they had, and new strategies and tactics were developed around things that were discovered. So not just the things I mentioned, obviously, but any random bug, glitch, or esoteric that gets discovered and used in the game. So this brings us to today. While the short hop laser example might stay, I don't think they would change something like that. I don't think things like air hyper viper beam comboing into itself, and definitely not roll canceling, would endure modern patches. Really think about it about roll canceling. Do you think they would let, say, Kai, who everyone definitely loves, do like invincible food arcs and stuff? Like, I don't think so. I don't think that would last. But I mean, I've been talking in extremes, right? A more recent example, and I think something that's a lot easier to point to, is actually not in my field. I was thinking about talking about how they changed like Snapback and Dragon Ball Fighters from season 2 to season 3, but I think a better example is probably something that actually popped up on my feed recently. This is from Street Fighter V. So fellow fighting game content creator Brian F played Oro at some point in Street Fighter V, and Oro had a fast fall in Street Fighter V that seemed to be unintentional, and it looked like he was having a lot of fun. There's a bunch of videos about it, like, oh man, check out his new tech with Oro, it's sick, he could do this fast fall thing and really mess with people. And then they patch it out because it was not intentional. So the party lasted, I don't know how many months, maybe 6 months, maybe a year. And not only that, it's a patching game, so to my knowledge, you can't even play that version of Street Fighter V if you even want to. So for better or worse, you don't really have to deal with unintended things. It's like we're really playing the game that fighting game developers are like really presenting to us. And I think for especially a lot of the popular, more classic games, there's this thing of like, oh, there's like a real game under the game that we're presented, as opposed to today where devs are like, oh, here you go, this is what you're playing, these are the characters, this is what we did, this is what they do, this is what we kind of want you to do, go have fun and see what you could do. If anything's broken, we're gonna patch that shit real quick. The more curious among you were like, you did mention this thing about you kind of have to play it out and develop what you could around what's being discovered. How long would people have to wait? Well, that's kind of another reason why I kind of picked the games I wanted to talk about, right? New Smash games are pretty uncommon. You know, Melee came out in 2001. Brawl, I want to say, was like 2008. I'm pretty sure. Where Marvel vs. Capcom 2 and Capcom vs. SNK 2, these are games from the dark ages of fighting games. Despite fighting games being released during this time, it's really the dark ages of Capcom fighting games, but that's honestly a whole other, I'm not even gonna go there. But I think we can say patches are overall pretty good for fighting games. Not only do they patch out things that might be like honestly broken or maybe ruin the game or warp the balance of the game a lot, but also in that we don't have to wait for brand new games to get these fixes and updates and stuff. The expectation right now for at least all the fighting games I've played is that the balance patches are free.
This video is brought to you by Manscaped.com. The holidays are coming quickly, and the last thing you want is to look crusty at a family gathering or party. But that's what Manscaped is here for, with the Beard and Balls bundle that includes the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra and the Beard Hedger. So, the Lawnmower 5.0 Ultra features 2 interchangeable skin-safe blade heads, giving you the luxury of choice for your shave. On top of that, it's waterproof, so you can save time in the shower. The beard hedger is the perfect companion for styling facial hair. We all have our preferences for beard length, and the beard hedger complements that by having 20 different length options, from stubble to full-on beard. These two come together. Bundle up and save with 20% off and free international shipping when you use code LordKnight in all caps when you go to manscaped.com/LordKnight. And thank you to Manscaped for sponsoring this video.
But another way that fighting games kind of feel different from the past is, well, the actual feel of the game. How do fighting games actually read your inputs? What gives fighting games that like crispy, responsive feel? I would say it's a combination of two main factors. So the first one, the input buffer, as in how long does the input buffer of the game accept your inputs? The smaller the buffer, the less time the buffer will save your inputs. The bigger the buffer, the opposite. You might think bigger is better, but if the buffer is too big, you'll get moves that you don't want. I really felt this when I started playing Smash Ultimate way back when it launched in 2018, and I believe that game has a 10 frame buffer. Now, if the buffer is too small, rather than you getting stuff by accident, you'll feel like the things that you're trying to do don't come out at all. So, for example, a pretty common thing in older fighting games is that if there's some type of input shortcut built into the game, which they would generally do by using multiple buttons, then you had to hit these buttons on the same frame. Remember, a lot of fighting games in the past would release in arcades first. You couldn't really customize your controls that much, if at all. So take, for example, the first traditional fighter I played, Melty Blood. Love talking about Melty Blood. So in that game, you could dash and air dash two different ways. You could either do a manual input, which so a dash would be like forward forward, a back dash would be like back back, and the instant air dash forward would be, we don't talk about that, but it's not the input you're thinking about. It's not the input you're thinking about at all. It's a cursed input, frankly. However, you could choose to use the A and B button. So this is a game that generally has 4 or 5 buttons, A, B, C, D, and Q or E. Q for quick action. So pressing A and B would let you do the dash. But if you don't hit it at the same time, then you won't get the dash. So you would see in matches every now and then someone jumping forward and just kind of whiffing the B button. And if you didn't play the game, you're like, man, there's not even anyone near them. Why did they do that? If you played the game, it's like, oh, missed air dash. Now the other one is hit stop. So my best friend Infil has a great glossary, an extremely brief moment where the game pauses for dramatic effect whenever an attack successfully hits. If you increase how many frames an attack's hit stop lasts for, you can greatly exaggerate the power and force of a strike, and usually when you feel like an attack is beefy, it's because of this. And honestly, this is a perfect definition. It's why jabs feel so light and quick compared to like heavy attacks or big command normals. And I also think, unlike buffers, it's probably a lot more obvious why too much hit stop is not a good thing. Not only does it kind of make things visually clunky, for lack of a better word, it can actually make some defensive options weaker, on top of making the game itself slower. So let's take a look at this CS2 Makoto combo, for example. While it's clear that these moves are heavy hitting, this combo just slows the game down all around. And to be honest, even without this extreme, long combos plus a lot of hit stop just kind of makes the game feel like heavy, for lack of a better word. BlazBlue ended up reducing the hit stop in Chrono Phantasma, which contributed a lot to the high-speed game that we see now. And it's kind of funny that I hit on hit stop, ha ha ha, because the next major thing I'd want to talk about, the third thing, would be about slowdowns. And I really keep thinking about a comment I got about Tekken 8. So earlier this year, I challenged myself to play Tekken 8 for 1 week. Really, it was 72 hours, but I extended it to 1 week because I was salty. I really wanted to get that purple rank, right? And Tekken 8 has a new mechanic called Heat. So this upgrades your character. It can be used for conversions, additional offense, gives your character special properties, and every character has like a unique exit that they could use for both mix-ups or guaranteed offense, things like that. If you've been playing 2D fighting games for like any time in the past 10 years, this mechanic sounds like relatively standard fare, but for a Tekken player, this is like a revolutionary, new, very game-changing thing. People were very mad at it. My reaction was kind of like, hey man, first time? And a lot of replies I got was like, yeah dude, like if I wanted to deal with screen freeze, character pose, power up into plus frames, I would play the games that have that. And I was like, you know what, man? Fair enough. And I think it leads into another kind of like good point. Like outside of whatever real Tekken is supposed to be, right? It's an addition of a thing that you have to deal with again every single round that both slows the game down and also doesn't make you feel like you're actually in good control of the match until this thing clears and you get past it. And I'm not saying the match itself is slowing down. You'd be thinking about like a, say, Dragon Ball FighterZ sparking type thing, where like the momentum basically freezes and can potentially flip instantly. Because sparking gives you HP back, it gives you a bunch of special options, new combos, new mix-up opportunities, and people generally use it to protect their team. So if you had a lead in the 3v3, someone is likely going to use sparking to try to reverse that and try to get them a lead of 3-2 instead of you. So I'm not talking about that. What I'm talking about is heat quite literally freezes the game while the character's like, I'm going into heat, letting you know that it's about to be party time. Fighting games have a lot of these type of activations and slowdowns in general. But if you were to go back to, say, even before Guilty Gear Xrd, you would notice that cut-ins and freezes were pretty rare and then also very short, basically just for supers. And I think this is a huge element of games just feeling faster. So these days, either you have an activation, this is anime fighter terms by the way, Tekken, Heat, for example, or some type of slowdown mechanic. So I played Guilty Gear Xrd and Strive. Both of these have options that cost a resource that quite literally slow the game down. Xrd from anywhere on the screen, Strive you have to be in a certain range within your opponent. Some games do the big dramatic counter hit thing, some games do the way too long super animation thing, and even more. In older games, these either didn't exist or were far shorter. The extreme in my experience, for example, is Vampire Savior. Vampire Savior has an activation called Dark Force, but compared to Heat, it's far shorter. And not only that, take a look at how Vampire Savior handles the end of a round. Yes, this is the end of the round. You actually just kind of get Oki. There's no slowdown at all. There's no going back to mid-screen. The knockdown system is pretty fair in this game. You know, you could roll, you're invincible, but you could read the roll and mix them up that way. An important thing to note, though, is that the HP totals also carry. So whoever's in the lead, it's not like they refill their life bar. You just continue from where you're at, which means also, if you're down for some reason and you take a point off someone who's up, you're still going to have that life total. There's recoverable life in this game, but it's fine. However you feel about how fair this is, we hopefully can agree this at least keeps you locked into the game. If we were to use Strive as an example, I actually think they do a pretty good job of this. One of the biggest complaints about Guilty Gear Xrd was that you can apply slowdown from anywhere on the screen. Some pretty simple tactics involving resource that you could use to control the entirety of the screen. The most common one being just projectile YRCs. So Kai's Stun Edge YRC, Raven Needle YRC. If you've watched any video about Guilty Gear Xrd, you've probably heard about these type of moves plus resource. In Strive, you have to get closer to your opponent to apply slowdown. So it actually is pretty good for the pace of the game. On top of them actually adding some interesting meter usages like roam and cancel. If there was something that I think breaks up the pace of the game for real, it would definitely be the wall break over anything else. While the screen transitions from one part of the stage to the other, you're just kind of like, I don't know, watching it happen. Just thinking about like, oh, what am I going to do next and things like that. It's fine to take a break and think about what to do next. But as far as just the raw pace and raw speed, especially compared to older fighting games, this one thing alone slows down the game. And sometimes there could be 3 or 4 wall breaks back and forth depending on HP and guts and what type of hits you're getting. So even though you kind of die fast, you have these like I'm going fast, break. I'm going fast, where in an old game you wouldn't really have that. Now, I'm sure there's a nerd emoji watching right now in the comments being like, well, LK, you know, that might be true, but in an older game, when you get knocked down in the corner, you're sitting there and watching anyway while the game stops, while the person jumps in on you and does a high-low or something. And that can last for the rest of the game. And I'd be like, okay, fair, I guess, but at least it's happening quickly. Now, I think this thing is tough too, because these slowdowns do actually assist with the viewability of the game. We all memed the big bombaclat counter hits when this game came out, right? But it's especially clear what is happening, what type of hit is happening, and why it's happening, especially to an older game. So here's a pop quiz for you. Do you know why this combos? You can even pause the video if you want. If you answered that it only combos on counter hit and on normal hit it does not work on standing, you'd be correct. This thing actually legitimately puzzled me for months when I played BBCT, but you would have no idea if you didn't know. Characters do flash red and there is a counter hit message when you counter hit them, but the amount of time on these low hits and attacks are almost negligible between the normal hit and the counter hit. So without knowing in advance this thing, you would be pretty confused. So a pretty general old method would be to apply some type of very obvious effect on counter hit. This is where your wall bounces, ground bounces, and ground slides come from. These also are not applied very evenly, so sometimes these lead to crazy conversions that they have to dial back, and this is where things like wall bound comes from. So to be honest, from my perspective, this thing about counter hit slowdown was a pretty clever solution. And speaking of solutions, this brings me to the last thing that I think is the reason why fighting games feel so different compared to when you were younger or when you were a kid. And we have to talk about the internet. There are both far more competitive players and casual players of fighting games today than they were in the past. And information, especially for baseline and honestly all the way up to like intermediate things, gets shared far more quickly than before. It may seem like characters get figured out faster now, but low-key, I feel like if some older games came out now, we would figure out those characters faster just because there's more people working on it and there's more sharing going around. Whether or not you think this is a good thing pretty much depends on the type of person you are. The person who complains about the lack of freedom in today's games and not feeling like they're able to explore so much might be pining for the times when they were like a child or a teenager where they'd be either playing alone or with friends and just messing around to see like what works, but not really able to get too deep in everything that the game has to offer. Where now, and within like the first week or so, I'm not gonna say like optimal combos are super figured out, but a baseline plan for a character gets figured out quite quickly. And if you aren't into playing matches, then it's unlikely you're going to be able to figure this out. And this type of thing you can iterate on honestly forever. If you're a more competitive person, or you just like learning, or you want to play but you don't want to like take time to like figure stuff out, then it's good that you could just get in fast and get into matches. In the end though, it's up to you. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I've been actually thinking about this a lot because I have both done this before with actually Kizzy. I watched a Guilty Gear Slash tournament with Kizzy once, and we were like, yo, like, they're pretty good for the time. And after talking to a couple of friends about it, I was like, you know, like I should probably like write something about this. It's kind of an interesting topic. Let me know what you guys think though. As usual, if you have any questions or comments, definitely feel free to leave them in the comment section below. If you are interested in any like coaching, Guilty Gear coaching, things like that, that's over on Medify, medify.gg/LordKnight. I stream pretty much every weekday, especially I'm like home right now, smiley face. Monday through Friday, so you can hop over to twitch.tv/LordKnight. That's where we do scrub cook confessions and any other like Twitch event I want to do, along with just like general practice and hanging out, and recording for my second channel, LordKnight Chronicles. It's all done there. Like and subscribe if you guys feel like it, and I will see y'all next time. Peace out.